So a very warm welcome. A good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and a very warm welcome to this BA Community webinar. This session is a slightly different format to some of the webinars you may have seen before. It's going to be a roundtable discussion. And we've got three speakers who are speaking at the BA Conference Europe in September. So first of all, if you're not aware of the BA Conference Europe, do go check it out. I will put a link in the chat a little bit later. It's a conference taking place in London in September. A whole range of diverse speakers on diverse topics. Definitely worth getting there if you can. And we have three speakers who are going to be chatting to us today. The idea is, rather than having a panel session with three speakers who are experts in the same topic, we've actually chosen three speakers with very different topics. And the idea is to see what connections there are between these three very different topics. And we've had a chat in advance, and I'm really confident there are going to be some really interesting connections. So, as always, please feel free, as the session continues, to type your chat in the chat so you can chat to each other in the chat, keep the conversation going. And if you have questions for the panel, put them in the Q&A tab. So remember, questions go in the Q&A tab, and just your general chat in the chat tab. I will try and keep an eye on the Q&A. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as well, but I may miss stuff in the chat. So, what I'm going to ask first is for each of our esteemed panelists to give a very quick intro, sort of 2 minutes or less, into what you are. And this is sort of starting to sound like mastermind now, but like what your specialist subject is. So, because you're next to me on the, or at least on my screen, Caroline, we're going to start with you.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for obviously inviting me along. So, Caroline Beasley, I have been a business analyst for around 20 years now. I've worked across different industry sectors, and I've worked on a real variety of projects, as you could probably imagine, working in change for that long. So I've worked in some really quite technical projects, sort of information security projects, API middleware, and then I've worked on some much more business-focused projects. I've worked helping support implement a new operating model for an IT function in an organisation, as well as other sort of operating model initiatives to support change going into different organisations. And so really that's sort of where my specialist subject has kind of come to play, really, because across those different companies and different projects and experiences, I've come to really actually enjoy that and understand how well the BA skill set really kind of lends itself to that. So that's sort of the reason really why I chose last year to talk about this at the BA conference, and it sparked quite a lot of interest, and it's sort of a bit of a journey that's kind of continuing really, which is why I'm taking it back again this year. So as I say, it's that, you know, that mixture of the analytical mindset and the creative mindset, and that's what I really enjoy about that type of work. Thanks,
Fantastic.
Adrian.
Thanks, Caroline. And if anyone tuning in didn't catch Caroline's webinar on operating models, that was a really popular one as well. So definitely check out Caroline's session at the conference, but also we've got a recorded webinar in the archives. So from Caroline to Mark. Mark, who are you and what's your specialist subject?
Hi, Adrian. Thanks very much for having me here. So my name is Mark Cross. I am a technical business analyst and recovering telecommunications engineer. I've been in business analysis now for about 12 years, focusing primarily on cloud transformation and information security. And over the years, I've basically been really like building up both of those areas. So these days, I pretty much see myself as having an equal foot both in the business analysis and in the cybersecurity worlds. And this is really a passion subject of mine. Really, what drives me is making sure that the solutions that we give don't just deliver value, but they also deliver resilience and security to our organisation, making our organisation safer.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mark. And last but by no means least, Helen, who are you and what's your specialist subject?
Hi, and again, thank you for inviting me along to this. Really exciting to be part of it. So I'm Helen Holder. I work as a lead BA within the Ministry of Justice, and I have been BA for quite some time as well, so about 14 years, working mainly in the public sector. And I also do some volunteer work with like IOBA. And the subject that I'm going to be talking about is character crafting. So it's my first time appearing at the conference this year. And character crafting is again a bit of a passion subject, and it's really about some work and research that I started to do, having struggled a little bit at times with the BA role. I think we forget sometimes that there's a real human element to our role. And even though I've had that kind of 14 years of experience, I still find myself struggling at times with the famous imposter syndrome. And so it's really about the work that I did personally to kind of look into that aspect of the role. And hopefully along the way, some helpful things that I can share that have helped me in my journey.
Fantastic. Thanks, Helen. What a really great set of topics there. We've got operating models, cybersecurity, and character crafting and some of the human side. I'm really excited to see what connections we draw between these. So our plan is now to speak for probably about 8 to 10 minutes on each of those. But we may well find that we find synergies and we start going off on all sorts of tangents. So again, if you're attending live, do feel free to chat in the chat. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. But I'll tell you what, let's start with operating models. So, Caroline, the webinar that you presented recently got really good feedback, as I know did your session at the conference last year. And I'm sure people who went to that will go back this year to your half-day session that you're doing. What do you think it is about this topic that is attracting so much attention in the BA community?
Yeah, and you're right, it has attracted quite a lot of attention. And I think for me, having sort of reflected upon, those conversations, what I've heard, I think as a BA, we're very often sit in a very traditional BA role. Okay, so as a BA, you gather requirements, you manage those through, you help support, through testing. And that's sort of, I say, the very, for me, traditional route of what a BA does. But actually, it's I don't think we necessarily want to be kind of pigeonholed into going, that being our role repeatedly, project after project. And actually, the skill set, I guess, that we have as a BA, yes, we've got that, I'd say, that analytical mindset, but actually, to make us successful as BAs, we have a really strong set of people skills as well, that ability to collaborate with people within our organization and outside of that, to be able to read people, some of those non-verbal kind of communication cues. And it's really, it's really great to be able to really lean on that, I suppose, and step outside of that traditional BA role. So for me, I think it gives, as a, somebody who's been a BA for a number of years, and doesn't want to be feeling like they're in a hamster wheel, it gives that opportunity to step out of that. And I think that's why it was quite thought-provoking from a number of people, because they can see, or could see, that actually this is an area that they hadn't necessarily had the opportunity to step into, but actually could see themselves stepping into quite nicely.
That's really interesting, Caroline. As you were speaking there, this phrase came into mind, and I don't know whose phrase it is, but like adjacent possibility. It's like, it doesn't seem so far away and so scary. It seems adjacent and it seems doable if the opportunities and the conditions are right. So, So there may well be some people tuning in here who've heard the term operating model, but don't know what it is. So how would you describe what an operating model is, and how might a BA represent one?
So, an operating, well, there's a couple of things I just want to kind of call out here first. So the operating model is a term, and then target operating model. And I think quite often those two get used interchangeably. When we talk about a target operating model, people immediately just think restructure, organizational change, and that's what it means to them. But actually, it's much more broad than that. So an operating model is essentially, it is what it says on the tin, right? It's a model that says, this is how we are going to operate. That could be across a whole organization. So what are all of those capabilities do you need within that organization? What are the processes that you need in that organization to be able to function? And And it sort of essentially lays that out, in a conceptual way at the highest level. What are all those component parts that basically mean something can function, as I say, either organizationally, or it could be to support, say, some tooling, a new application that you're bringing in, a new product you're bringing into your organization. And it does cover those different elements in terms of what are the core sort of processes that we need to have in place and to consider. What does that mean from a people point of view? Organizationally, what do we need in place to be able to stand that up? What technology, what information do we need? And it's all of those those components, those core components that feed into your operating model. And if you've got those different, what I call operating model components considered, then you as an organization, working organization, we understand how we operate day to day. So that's essentially an operating model. It's all of those component parts. That means we can move, we can operate on a daily basis. The target operating model is essentially, it's that point at which we recognize that there's a need for change. That could be there's a new strategy, there's a new that we want to invest in, to build into. And we recognize that we're not there at the moment and we need to design for that target state. We need to change the way we do things to enable us to be able to operate effectively in the future. So that's where the target operating model piece is. So it's almost like everyone's in this mode of operation at the moment. We're in our current state. We have a current state operating model. It might be actually we haven't really called that out and we haven't written it down, but fundamentally all the parts are there. And then we recognize there's a need for change. We design how we want that to be. And then once we implement it, so it might be, well, we're in this new world, we need to train people, we need to restructure the way our roles are organized, we might need to introduce new skills, might be some new tooling. And then we're in that, essentially we're in our mode of operation again. So that target operating model is only really that bit in the middle where we're in that design phase. And I think that's where, often that terminology gets a little bit confusing.
Definitely. And again, as you were speaking there, I really liked how you described that, Caroline. And I was thinking the distinction that might be important for some people in the BA space is when we're talking about design, we're talking about business design. So we're not talking about like application design, or that D word can mean so many different things in different contexts. And actually, there are a couple of really interesting questions that have come in already, which is great. So the first person has asked this question anonymously, and do feel free, if there's a question you want to ask anonymously, there's an anonymous button you can press. And they say, would operating model not be part of a traditional BA role, as it seems the consensus is based that it's something new? I've noticed that recently that different companies have a different set of core activities that BA is responsible for. So I think one thing we would probably all agree in is, yes, actually, there's a lot of diversity in business analysis. And I suppose also springboarding from this, there's always a bit of a, well, is our operating models architecture, are the analysis, does it really matter? What's your view?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's something that I, was asked back a year ago about, why are you talking about, this is a business architecture kind of remit. And my view on this is that, every organization is different. Right, the way that the roles are organised within a business are different, okay? And I've worked in organisations that are very small, and the role of a business architect just doesn't exist. So actually, as a BA, a business analyst, it's naturally been where I would step in and get involved in that. So I do think there's an element of every organisation is different. The way organisations define the roles and responsibilities of different roles is different as well. And I kind of come back to that point I kind of made at the beginning, which is it's around a kind of core skill set that I think as business analysts you hold, that mean that, we have the ability, and particularly when we're potentially a little bit more experienced as BAs, to kind of step back, see the bigger picture and kind of join the dots between those different component areas that are essential to be able to operate as a business. So you can argue it either way in terms of this is not a BA within BA role, it's a business architect. But actually, I guess to the point the person who's made the comment is, I see this as part of my BA role. So why would you think it's anything different? And I kind of come back to that. It depends how your role is considered within your organisation.
It's interesting, right? Because I often talk about a presentation I saw. This must be 15 plus years ago, maybe longer. Nick Devoyle, who some people around the table and attending will know, was at an event in London. He was saying, well, I'm paraphrasing, but was essentially saying one of the things you've got to remember is business analysis is made up, right? Like where the boundaries are made up. And I know that sounds flippant, and yes, of course there are standards, but those standards are also made up, by the way. You know, I mean they're based on best practice, but where the boundary is actually for us as a community to decide. And if it makes sense to do certain things in certain contexts, well, rather than being perhaps too worried about where unless there's a good reason for a boundary to be there, that work adjacent stuff, you know, we can bring it in. We can invite the architects in and let them invite us in, and so on. But so that leads on actually to another really interesting question that Michelle has asked. And Michelle says, I'd be really interested to hear which BA techniques, if any, can be used when putting an operating model together. So what do you make of that, Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's a few kind of go-to techniques, and I think my most favorite one, which we will all inevitably have come across, is the Poppet model. Okay,
of course, I knew you were going to say Poppet.
Yeah, it's a great one. It's kind of your people, your organization, your processes, information and technology. The Poppet model. I mean, it doesn't get as solid as that, I think, and it's so memorable that actually, you know, when you're thinking about, we need to consider how our world needs to change to respond to change. Let's go through each of those component areas and think about what might be necessary. And when you're thinking about people, you're thinking about, have we got the right skills in-house? Okay, do we need to train existing members of staff? Do we need to bring new skills in? Do we need to structure them differently? There might be cultural elements that we may be impacted as well. And then you move on to, okay, what does this mean from a process point of view? What are our core processes? Actually, there's some new processes, or there's some existing processes that are going to have to be tweaked to enable us to adopt that change and move forwards. And so the Poppet model is a great one. But there's a couple of others that I will sort of reference as well. There's a model called the operating model canvas, which again is it's similar as an acronym, POLISM. So it talks about suppliers and the location and your core processes, and it talks about, from a management point of view, from an information point of view, how, you know, what are the considerations there, as well as the people and the data aspects. So very similarly aligned, but subtly different. And I really like that one. It's quite visual, and you know, you can use that in a workshop environment, post-it notes. You can see that one work really nicely. And in fact, I'm using that one as a use case at the conference for my workshop. So anyone who's coming will see that one in action. And then there are other models. I mean, there's Jay Galbraith's STAR model, which again sort of talks to some of those key areas in terms of structure and processes, but it also talks about people and reward and how you kind of reward people. So again, it's similar component areas, I suppose, but a slightly different model. So there are some very well established models out there, and I think, you know, starting for 10, you always take your Poppet model with you, and that will kind of put you in good stead.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just good advice for life, really, generally, isn't it, Caroline? So excellent. Well, thank you. And thanks, Indy, for the question there. We'll come to that in a moment, but I do just want to segue from operating models and actually let's go to cybersecurity. Let's go from Caroline to Mark, and I'm sure we'll start to, you know, find connections between these. And I mean, Mark, coming from operating models to cybersecurity might seem like a complete juxtaposition. Putting you on the spot, which is very unfair, but do you see a connection? And please say yes.
So absolutely. So one of the things I think a lot about is that the business analysis role is not a straight line. We all operate in different domains. Some people are business analysts working in agile application development. Some of us are business analysts working in training and development. Others are involved in IT solutions or organizational restructuring. But across all of these things, really, I think operating models form the foundation. They're where you implement the strategy and the vision for the organization. But at the same time, cybersecurity is the other domain that really does bridge all of the others. It spans. I'm really glad that Caroline brought up the Poppet model. That's another one that's close to my heart as well. Cybersecurity, if you're not looking at the people, the processes, the technology, the information, you aren't protecting the entire organization against all the various threats that are out there. So yeah, there's a huge overlap between these two themes.
Excellent, great. So, I mean, let's go back to basics, Mark. A question you probably get asked a lot, but what is cybersecurity?
Okay, so I think for many years we were talking about information security being the buzzword. Now we're talking about cybersecurity. So I think the key thing here is understanding why the word cyber is so critical. And effectively, when you start bringing cyber in, what we're talking about is it's security against threats that are facilitated by the internet. So just think of what the internet has done for business. Effectively, what the internet has done is it's put a great big lens alongside your business, which has allowed you to project your business offering across to people everywhere. But that lens works both ways. The lens actually also focuses all of the action of threat actors on your organization. So you don't just need to sort of protect yourself against the various threats in your neighborhood. There could be an organization tens of thousands of miles away with a small army of analysts who are focused on your organization, looking at it for any small way in. And if they find it, basically they could take over your entire organization. So, and this is very different for many of the other threats we think of. It's not like a process not being quite fit for purpose, and it breaks a little bit. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with a cyber threat, these people are adaptive. They will change their processes, their technologies, in order to find a way to exploit it. And if you put a fix in, they'll look for ways to go around that. So that's why cyber threats are so dangerous.
Yeah, and just springboarding from that, Mark, and I mean, correct me if my understanding is incorrect here, but my understanding is that, you know, for the medium and big size hacks which are targeted, there'll be things like privilege escalation where potentially they've been in there for months, right? So that's like they found a chink. You might have patched that, but they've already got from that machine somewhere else. So you're actually chasing this thing, and you know, so
it's like a game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah, that's quite a visual image if you put there. But yeah, I mean, it really is, and you know, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because and I'm just thinking about operating models and how quite often organizations are moving the interface closer and closer to the customer.
Yeah.
Right? And that's good for all of us, or I find it's good for many of us, not all necessarily. But actually, that creates another door in that perhaps wasn't there, where you had to go and speak to someone, and there was a computer in front of them. So I suppose there might be an older traditional view that well, security is just a type of NFR. I think it's fair to say we're beyond that. You know, it's much more than NFRs. So how can a BA approach cybersecurity?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. A lot of people do really focus on the NFR part of cybersecurity, and there are some NFRs that are really important. The six which I always keep in mind are the classic CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But there's also another three which I like to use as well, which are the properties of accuracy, utility, and control. Now, those are the first lens that I will always use whenever I'm looking across a a solution to make sure that you've got the most important boxes ticked. But beyond that, there's a whole bunch of functional requirements as well that need to be captured. And this is really important. It's really important because you need to make sure that you've got 100% solid coverage of your entire organization. And sometimes if you just say, for example, it needs to be compliant with ISO 27001, or it needs to follow one standard or another, what you find is that you end up with the protection delivered in different ways in different parts of the organization. And sometimes these don't quite overlap, exposing ways in which somebody else on the outside can actually exploit that difference and get in. There's not 100% coverage. And so that's where you need to have actually sort of cover functional characteristics, like, for example, there needs to be MFA enabled on privileged functions, or you need to have a particular type of encryption applied to sensitive data, and so that becomes a very important element of the overall cybersecurity strategy.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I mean, a much wider topic here, but as you were talking there, Mark, I was thinking it's interesting because there's a difference between good practice and standards, policies and requirements, and there's a coherence between them. But actually, the organisation needs a culture, or I would imagine the organisation needs a culture of cybersecurity to be built in, because otherwise you can have you can build the most robust, bulletproof whatever you're building, but if the thing next to it is wide open, then it doesn't really much matter.
Yeah. I think of it as three lines of defence. Obviously, you've got the cybersecurity specialists in the information security team right at the heart of it. Then you've got the cyber qualified change professionals around that, typically in IT. And then outside of that, you've got the rest of the workforce who also need at least a minimum level of cyber awareness, such as sort of don't click on that email, the phishing factor.
Absolutely, yeah. Which brings in a really nice a comment that David's made, which is David says, when it comes to cybersecurity, don't forget social engineering, which is it's a really good point. And so cybersecurity. So it's fair to assume then, Mark, that cybersecurity generally is about more than just the IT. Is that a fair statement?
So it probably involves IT in some parts of the system, but yeah, you have to think about it holistically as part of a package, because the process will always have some kind of a human element in it somewhere, if only because it's designed to be used by humans. You do need to anticipate how users other than your intended user are able to use this functionality, and that could be, as David said, it could be social engineering of the process. It could be what happens if you imitate somebody else, or what if you take advantage of the way that most people behave and use that to sort of like enter in the process like a Trojan horse. Sort of you look like an ordinary customer, but then you do a switch. So, for example, it could be something as simple as changing your session ID in your session, and suddenly you're pretending to be somebody else, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, let's do some. We've had a few questions in, so let's do a few quick fire questions, Mark. These are, I think, quite big questions, but we'll see if we can cover a few of them off. So, and apologies if I mispronounce anyone's name. It's always hard when I don't necessarily know you, but I think it's Karthik asks, what kinds of changes do businesses need to make to their operating models in regards to cybersecurity over the next couple of years because of generative AI? So changes to operating models in regards to cybersecurity, if they're implementing or playing with generative AI. So I guess Mark and or Caroline might have a view on that.
Well, I'll say just a couple of points regarding the cyber side, and then I'll let Caroline pick up to cover the operating model side. So in terms of the cybersecurity side, I think there's probably about three points that you need to be aware of. So the first thing is you need to really, the only way that you can actually defend yourself against an adversarial AI tool is to have a defensive AI tool that is able to model all the various attack vectors and identify how it's going to be able to defend against them. So being able to identify anomalous behavior that is almost certainly artificial. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is we need to be very, very careful about the deployment of any kind of generative AI tools in the organization. Yes, they're fantastic for productivity, but also we can't lose we can't lose track of the fact that it is a very good vector for attack. So for example, if somebody is able to corrupt the data set that this AI tool is based on, they're going to be able to influence our behavior, change what we're investing in, change the decisions we make, and basically get the organization to do whatever we want. So it becomes all the more important to make sure that the data that we've got is properly classified, properly secured, make sure that is kept protected. I think with that, I'll hand back to Caroline.
Yeah, Caroline, anything to add from an operating model perspective? It's a really good but quite a wild card question.
It is, and I was sort of thinking, right, okay, crikey, how do I answer this? And I think for me, an operating model doesn't stand still, right? It continually evolves. And so for me, you know, generative AI and what that means to businesses means that we, as businesses, need to continually review our operating model, right? And think about, well, what does that mean? Again, back to the puppet model, right? From our people, okay, is there something we need to do around educating our staff? It's about putting those processes in place to kind of respond and protect, and you know, those elements that Mark talked about. And so for me, that's the kind of the operating model piece there is around, don't just assume you've got your operating model there, you've drawn a line under it. It will continue and will need to continue to evolve, because you'll just end up, I say, not protecting yourself and not where you need to be as an organization.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? Because that comes back to agility and the ability to pivot towards opportunities and threats. And cybersecurity is a big area where there are threats. So, as final question, Mark, on cybersecurity before we move on to Helen and talk about character crafting and see what the connections are there. And I'm going to sort of mould a couple of questions that have been asked together. So Catherine asks, what advice would you give to BAs as a starter for 10? What things should they consider when conducting their analysis activities? So things like tips, resources, techniques. And we also got an anonymous question which says, what's the boundary for the BA role when it comes to cybersecurity? So do BAs go deeper? So sort of blending those together, what are the go-to tools, techniques? What should someone who's just getting into this, what should they go and look at, Mark?
Okay, right. So I think the first thing is that when I think of cybersecurity business analysis, I'm thinking it's something a little bit different. It's not just a business analyst that is involved on a cybersecurity project. It's a business analyst that comes into our project with a cybersecurity mindset. And what do I mean by that? Well, typically what you do is you come into the project early. You basically sort of set the terms of engagement, so make sure that the project has a clear understanding of the nuances, the cybersecurity impacts, to make sure that the right stakeholders are approached at the right time, and also that you can do a cyber risk assessment to understand where this change is going to start to be touching at the fringes of the risk tolerance of the organisation. So, for example, if you're going to be involved in changing the roles of people doing something important, that is flagged up to information security, because obviously if new people are doing new things, then obviously people who are used to talking to the same people now have to get to talk to different people, and so they could be open to imposters coming in. So you need to be aware of some of those things. And in terms of the skills they need to be aware of, I think being able to do a proper risk assessment is really important. The other skill I think that's really important is basically being able to negotiate and really sell the idea of security, because so many of our stakeholders are really laser focused on the delivery of value, the delivery of functionality, and a lot of the time they're not as aware, or they're not as the delivery of that in a secure way is not as front and center. And so what I try and do is I try and talk a lot about when you're prioritizing saying the value of a particular feature, you think about it in 3 dimensions: the effort it involves, the value it delivers, and also the risk, the cost of the risk that comes with that. So bundling those through and being able to use that as a means to sell the importance of this new feature or piece of effort.
Fantastic, thanks, Mark. I really like that effort, value, risk equation is such an important one. So excellent. Well, I'm sure we'll come back and talk more about cybersecurity and indeed operating models. But Helen, I'm keen to move on and talk about character crafting. And in fact, until I remember you, in fact, it was in one of the, I don't know if you remember, it was in one of the IIBA brown bag sessions, you mentioned it, and I was like, oh, what's that? And I'd never heard of it before. So I know you mentioned that your presentation's about character crafting. Can you explain a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, there was a question that was posed a while ago around what's new with business analysis, what's going on, and there's often a lot of attention that I think that we pay to new technologies that are coming in, and again, kind of, I guess, bringing up this reference of POPIT. There's different products that are coming up onto the market. We've certainly seen lots of changes in the business analysis world to our ways of working with, having to connect with our stakeholders virtually and things like that. For me, the one thing that it got me thinking about was really the kind of personal competencies, those kind of personal skills that we have to bring to the role. And that sometimes I think when we think about our development, and we can tend to focus on those kind of tools and techniques side of things and overlook some of those, as I say, very kind of human behavioural qualities that we need to bring. So character crafting is really my kind of term around how I think we need to make sure that we find real space and time to dig into those kind of competencies that are really key to our role. And instead, I think there can sometimes be a tendency to think of character as being quite a fixed thing. You'll sort of hear people say, oh, I can teach you technical skills and tools and techniques, but I can't teach this. And actually, what I've learned is you can teach behaviours, you absolutely can. And that's what I mean by the crafting element. This is about being really clear that if there are parts of your BA role that you are struggling with or finding challenging, that there is something you can do about that, in the same way that you can go away and learn a tool or a technique.
It's really interesting, Helen. I like that a lot. And I may be misinterpreting it, so do correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like that idea of growth mindset is important here. Would you say that's true? And if so, what does growth mindset mean to you? Or what does having a growth mindset mean to you?
So I absolutely think it's to do with growth mindset. And I think, we all know that one of the things that I think makes a lot of people successful as BAs is that kind of curiosity, that love of learning. I think for me, when I'm thinking about growth mindset in the context of character crafting, it's about turning some of that internally. And it's about having that growth mindset about yourself and your own personal skills and characteristics, actually, and not just sort of what technology you can learn about, or what tools and techniques, as I say, that you can learn about. It's really kind of not seeing yourself as this fixed thing in terms of how you respond in different scenarios. So I think that's that's the kind of connection I would make there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. I taking a slight segue, one thing you mentioned when we were sort of doing our intros was about imposter syndrome. And I think this is something that isn't talked about enough in the BA community because, I mean, it's sort of interesting, isn't it? Because like letting people see behind the curtain a little bit before this session, I think it's fair to say that we were all a little bit nervous before we got started. There were, and that's kind of natural, isn't it? So I wonder what have you found any ways of getting over or becoming okay with imposter syndrome? How does that play into all of this as well?
I think there are lots of different approaches that you can take, and there are lots of different ways that you can kind of create your own kind of version of what I would term guided practice, about how you kind of develop different areas that might be holding you back. I think a lot of it is about remembering that when you're looking to develop those kind of personal behaviours and overcome some of these things, actually the power is in doing. And I know Caroline talked right at the very beginning about, should BAs get involved in target operating models, stepping into new roles? So I think it's sometimes it's just doing those things, it's stepping into those moments, and just pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and sort of embracing that kind of bravery. You can't be brave without being scared, right? So it's things like that. That can very much kind of help with that imposter syndrome. But there's lots of other things as well around. I've done a lot of reading around, for example, how you can create alter egos for yourself, as a way of kind of just creating an image, a brand that you want to present that perhaps helps you step into, a slightly different person and slightly less, someone who feels slightly less like an imposter. And I think when, again, thinking about both of the topics today, I think there's lots of people probably sat there and thinking target operating models, cybersecurity, all feels very big. For some of us, if you're not familiar with those topics, it could feel quite intimidating and scary. And I think it's just remembering that if that's something that you want to be interested in, that don't let that fear hold you back. Look at how you can just step into those roles and step into those spaces.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. So we've got quite a few questions coming in now, Helen. So let's do some quick fire questions. So the first is an anonymous question. So BAs have been choosing or using ChatGPT for creating user stories, for preparing requirements documents under the label of saving time, but potentially losing their own creativity. Do you think that's like, and the person's used the phrase character degrading for a BA? Is there a danger of like negative character crafting if there's too much reliant on labour saving AI? That's an interesting question.
Absolutely. I think, one of the reason that I used the term character crafting is I heard the term job crafting a while ago, and it kind of reminds me a little bit. I think those two things can maybe go together a little bit. And so I think some of it depends on which parts of the BA role you particularly kind of find your affinities with. And so I don't necessarily think that using ChatGPT in those ways completely diminishes the role. I think there's been a lot of talk around, does AI replace business analysts? I think for each individual person, it's about encouraging you to find and connect with the aspects of your personality that you're really passionate about, the things, the kind of character strengths that you really want to bring to the foreground, and thinking about how you connect those to the role that you're doing. And then looking for ways to actually kind of bring that out. And the character crafting bit is really about helping you to maybe step beyond some of the boundaries that we quite naturally, I think, set for ourselves sometimes. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's a personal thing.
Yeah, and I think those boundaries, those self-imposed boundaries, it's so important to recognise that quite often they are self-imposed, and it comes back to that growth mindset, I suppose. So Michelle asks, which behaviours or characteristics do you think are the most important for BAs who might aspire to a senior BA role? Now that's I'm putting you somewhat on the spot, Helen, there, but off the top of your head, sort of top 3 or 4 characteristics for an aspiring senior BA.
So I know that, leadership can feel like we've all been on those courses where it asks you what's the difference between leadership and management, and you get shown a Venn diagram. But actually, I think when you step into some more senior roles, you suddenly find yourself in a lot of different scenarios that you haven't necessarily prepared yourself for, in terms of how you advocate for other people, how you kind of deal with honesty in an uncomfortable way when you have to sometimes give difficult feedback to people. And there's also things like, how you kind of perhaps deal with negotiation and conflict. Mark talked about negotiating, around getting people to pay attention to things like cybersecurity, or just kind of understanding the value of business analysis. So I definitely think in that sort of leadership space, there's some real scenarios that you can start to identify and think about how you might practice them, actually. And there are ways that you can do that. And doing things like, consciously thinking just in your everyday life about how you, for example, we talked, as I mentioned, honest feedback there, like how do you give feedback to a friend who's, asked you about an outfit they're wearing or something like that. There's always opportunities to practice these things. And so I think it's thinking about those things, not just in terms of your kind of professional career and what you do there, but thinking about, well, if these are the scenarios I'm going to find myself in as a senior BA, a leader of other BAs, how can I prepare myself in a way that when I step into those situations for real at work, I actually feel like I kind of know what I'm doing.
That's great advice there around almost finding a way of simulating it or trialing it in a low low stakes is the wrong word, but a different environment. So we've got more questions coming in. We'll come back to them. But what I'm keen to do before we address any more questions from the audience is to see if any of you three have got any other comments on connections that you've seen. So Helen, I mean, you had the hardest gig really of going last, but you've drawn some connections. I mean, any others that you'd particularly draw before we go to Caroline and Mark?
I think like there was, as I say, there was a lot of talk around the Poppet model, and I think it's that recognition really that the role of the business analyst really does take in that holistic view, and we are very much dealing with sort of having to kind of consider lots of different perspectives in environments. And I think, again, it was Caroline that mentioned this kind of continually evolving. That can feel really quite overwhelming, I think. And I think that's where, for me, acknowledging that and the role that we play in that space, I think helps to draw attention to the reason why we need to pay attention to those kind of personal competencies. And those more kind of behavioural skills, because I think they help us to succeed in those environments, and to kind of make sure that actually we're able to be effective in that kind of holistic view and bring that to the table.
So the holistic view, the poppet is the golden thread, and the pushing into the adjacent and not limiting ourselves, pushing beyond those glass walls sort of thing. Caroline, anything you'd add to that?
I mean, I suppose I'm thinking about, well, obviously what Helen's talked about, and having worked within that operating model space, I kind of and the fact that the role as BAs, we often are sort of that person in the middle. We see the bigger picture, we see opportunities, we see threats, and actually we almost have a duty of care sometimes to call those things out where we notice them. And I think that can often be potentially quite uncomfortable, because you're often calling that out to more senior management, and might not necessarily be what they want to hear. And so kind of going, I guess, back to Helen's point, is around building those skills, building those sort of personal competencies that enable you to sort of step into maybe, and also that point around how do you progress from, in terms of seniority, that kind of is foundational to be able to then become more strategic, to have those more senior conversations, and to have the confidence to be able to do that. So for me, I think that's kind of my kind of key tie in there with what Helen has talked about.
Fantastic. And just while we've got you there, Caroline, Indy asked a question earlier, which I didn't get to, which is how would you approach an operating change across different geographies? Which again is probably a question you could talk about for a whole hour, but just any quick nuggets on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes down to that cultural, the people element, isn't it, of an operating model, kind of in terms of consideration. I mean, it kind of works on lots of different levels in terms of if you're trying to define new ways of working, there's got to be consideration for some of those cultural differences. Just from a logistical point of view, the time differences, can be quite challenging, and almost down to how you present back your work, because again, that there are different nuances in terms of, what you present to your stakeholders in the UK might be seen quite differently or not come across quite as well in other regions as well. So, I guess there's lots of different angles, I suppose, in terms of that. And again, if you kind of look at how you communicate out what the changes in operating model are, you've got to consider, again, regionally, what does that mean? How would that play out? How would that be different? And have that as part of your kind of your mindset in terms of, we need to consider all of this, right? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to ensure the adoption of that new way of working is successful. So it comes down to what ticks the box in terms of adoption.
Absolutely, adoption and compliance and law and all the other complexities that those of us that have worked in those, I can imagine a few people with some scars on situations like that. So thanks, Caroline. So Mark, it's been a really broad conversation. Any other connections that you'd like to make at this point? You are muted, Mark. Just a classic.
It had to happen to somebody.
It had to happen. I'm amazed we got this.
Protecting everyone else. Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing Helen's perspective. Talking from the cybersecurity side, there really is such a huge overlap with the character space, and I think the way which I look at it is that from an adversarial perspective, they're certainly trying on a whole load of different hats to find a way into our organisations. So from our side, we're not just speaking to our regular stakeholders. We also have to try on a whole range of different hats, not in terms of changing our role, but just in terms of putting ourselves in the mindset of all our various stakeholders. I use my own model, which I call the 7 optics, which is basically going through all the different types of role that you need to think about to explore a particular situation. So I'm talking about strategic, disruptive, specialist, user-based, defensive, adversarial, and third party. So putting all of those different hats on and just trying and thinking, is the organization secure against all these different scenarios? So yeah, I think it's really great that we've been able to have Helen give her perspective on how we as business analysts can actually apply this kind of thinking.
Definitely, and actually, just am I right in thinking, Mark, that you've either got or are developing a training program around this sort of thing for BAs?
Yeah.
So if people are interested, they should presumably contact you on LinkedIn or however.
Yeah, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn. So the program's called 3 Steps Left, and basically it's a 2-part program. One is cybersecurity awareness specifically for change professionals, just what you need to know in order to deliver more resilient solutions. So it doesn't go into as much detail as a cybersecurity professional qualification, but it tells us what we need to know right now. And the other half is a cyber risk assessment tool, which is designed to, with very low effort, allow a project to be able to evaluate the risk profile of the change they're seeking to implement.
Fantastic. Well, as we move towards, we're nearly at the very end, but there's one very important question that I want to ask all of you, which is, without giving too much away, can you give us like a key takeaway? What are people going to get if they come to your session at the BA Conference Europe? And also, what's the best way for people to find out more about what you do or stay in touch? Like, is LinkedIn the best way for people to connect with you? So let's go in reverse order this time. So Helen, what's a key takeaway from your session, and how can people connect with you?
So absolutely, LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect with me. And really what I'm looking to get people to focus on is that idea that we can embrace and embody the character traits that we want to have. We don't have to stick, with our limiting beliefs about ourselves. And what I'm hoping is that through my session, I'll be able to provide some really practical examples and exercises that people can do to help them with that, share a little bit about the things that I have tried myself and the things I've learned on my own journey, and ultimately thinking about how your behaviours are something that can be caught, taught and sought, as the title says, because who we are is how we lead is the other thing that I like to kind of constantly quote. And I think if we think about how we can improve ourselves, I think it has a lot of impact on how we then influence and shape other people as well that work with us.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Helen. And Caroline, what are people going to take away, and how can people stay in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn, again, is probably the best route to reach out to me. So by all means, do connect. In terms of the conference, so I'm running a half-day workshop based on, what I presented last year, really, but making it much more hands-on and applied. So I'm using kind of a bit of a teach and apply type of approach. I've got a fictional use case that I will be working through as a group. So in groups of individuals, kind of having a think about ideation sessions around what that new world might look like for this particular use case. So I hope it to be, it should be really interactive, but also you'll take away some learning as well at the same time, and really sort of cement the understanding of the tools that you can use, and hopefully make some BA friends along the way as well, because it will be very much working in groups and sharing everyone's thoughts and as a wider group as well.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thanks, Caroline. Mark, what are people going to take away? How can they stay in touch?
Well, once again, LinkedIn's the best tool to contact me on. In terms of my my talk, I'm actually doing another masterclass, just like Caroline. Mine is a masterclass in security and quality, and the main takeaway, I think, is really the importance of getting cybersecurity baked in early on, doing a cyber risk assessment right at the beginning. The longer in the process it takes, the more that the quality of the output and the delivery risk of the organisation will increase. So getting it probably assessed early on means that everything gets through there smoother, and you end up with a more resilient, more secure solution at the end every time.
Fantastic. Well, excellent. Well, we are just about at time. So all that's left for me to do is to say a massive thank you to Caroline, Helen and Mark for a really, really interesting conversation. If the people who have tuned in have found it even a proportion of as interesting as I am, then I think we've probably done a good job. So thank you very much. I have put the link to all of your LinkedIns in the chat. So I always think that this is the point where if this was a real session, we'd be giving our speakers a round of applause. So definitely a virtual round of applause is due. But a great way of giving a virtual round of applause is by connecting with our speakers on LinkedIn. And if someone has said something that's particularly resonated with you, do connect and tell them so. Believe me, it really, really does make a difference when someone reaches out and does that and makes the time to do that. So if you've enjoyed it, do connect with people. I will just put everyone's LinkedIn in the chat just again, in case it's not top of your chat there. Also, you may or may not be aware, if this is your first webinar, you won't be aware, but many of you I know are regulars. I have fairly regular BA community webinars that we run. The next one is currently in October. There might be a September one, but I'm not sure at the moment because September's a busy month because of the BA Conference Europe. But there's a fantastic webinar on the 16th of October. I've put the link in the chat there, so completely free to join. Do look at that as well. Remember, the BA Conference Europe which happens in September. Caroline, Mark and Helen are speaking there, so do look at that. Again, the link is in the chat. Take a look at the agenda. And finally, if you're not familiar with BA Digest, BA Digest is a completely free quarterly magazine about all things BA related. The Q3 edition is out relatively recently, so I shall put a link to that in the chat as well now. So thank you, Caroline, Mark, Helen, fantastic session. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in live or indeed is watching the recording. So take care, everyone. See you soon. Stay safe. See you soon.
Thanks, Adrian, for bringing us all together. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.